Hello everyone and welcome to my ABCGH Spoilers channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. In the bustling town of Port Charles, where secrets simmer beneath the surface and loyalty shift like the tides along the harbor, the courtroom had once again become the focal point of drama. Willow Tait-Caine's trial for the attempted murder of Drew Cain had lasted weeks, with tension rising with each witness called piece of circumstantial evidence presented and heated objection from the defense. Willow's attorney, Alexis Davis, found herself in an impossible situation, her moral compass tested as she defended a client she now knew was guilty. The revelation came quietly but devastatingly from Trina Robinson and Kai Taylor, who discovered irrefutable evidence that Willow had pulled the trigger on that fateful night motivated by desperation, rage, and a twisted sense of self-preservation. However, Alexis chose silence in the courtroom owing to her professional duty and possibly a deeper fear of losing everything she had built after her own legal troubles. She delivered her closing arguments with the same fiery eloquence that had made her a legend in Port Charles legal circles, subtly steering the jury away from the truth while framing Michael Corinthos as a potential alternate suspect. It was a calculated risk that made her stomach churn, but she convinced herself it was necessary. The jury deliberated for hours that felt like days, swayed by the lack of direct physical evidence linking Willow to the gun beyond a doubt, and possibly influenced by her portrayal as a devoted mother and former nurse who had overcome so much. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. The courtroom fell silent as the foreman stood, paper in hand, and read the verdict aloud. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Willow Tait-Caine, not guilty." Gas echoed throughout the audience. Willow's face remained calm, but her eyes flickered with something unrecognizable. Relief perhaps, or the cold satisfaction of escaping justice. Drew, seated in the front row, stared straight ahead, his face a mask of controlled fury. Willow's mother, Nina Reeves, exhaled loudly, clutching her purse like it was a lifeline. On the other side, Michael Corinthos sat rigid, his jaw clenched, aware that the nightmare was far from over. The judge, a stern but fair veteran of Port Charles's never-ending parade of high-profile cases, banged the gavel once to conclude the proceedings. Willow was now protected by double jeopardy, which meant she would never be tried again for the same crime, no matter what new facts emerged. As the courtroom began to empty, shockwaves spread almost immediately. Whispers became murmurs, then outright conversations in the hallways. Alexis gathered her files with trembling hands, avoiding eye contact with anyone, especially Diane Miller, who had returned to Port Charles just in time to see the aftermath. Alexis had briefed Diane in hushed tones days before, and she looked sharp as ever in her signature power suit. The two women had many late-night conversations over coffee at Kelly's. Diane in her wheelchair and recovering from recent surgeries, but no less formidable. Diane listened, her eyes narrowing as Alexis revealed the burden she bore. "You know what this means," Diane said quietly. "If the truth comes out differently, the system failed and someone has to pay for it." Alexis nodded, guilt etched across every line of her face. Diane moved purposefully through the corridors now that the verdict was sealed. Sonny Corinthos attempted to contact her earlier that day, stopping by the Miller and Davis offices only to be told she was in court. Suzanne, his associate, had delivered the news, and his face darkened as he processed the acquit. Sonny, the ever-present protector of his family, saw red. Willow's release made Michael more vulnerable. Rumors were already circulating that the ADA would turn her attention to him next, claiming he had framed his ex-wife or obstructed justice in some way. Sonny couldn't let that happen. Diane, however, had her own plan in the works. In the days preceding the trial's conclusion, she had quietly pursued a loose thread that Alexis had been too conflicted to pull. The gun used in the shooting, Edward Cordain's antique piece from the family collection, had been recovered, but the chain of custody remained unclear. More importantly, Diane had obtained new forensic evidence from a private investigator she trusted implicitly. It wasn't enough to overturn the verdict in the traditional sense. Double jeopardy was unavoidable. However, it was explosive enough to completely shift the narrative. Diane entered the judge's chambers late that afternoon. As the sun began to set over the harbor with an emergency motion, the judge, surprised but intrigued, granted her entry. Diane organized the documents methodically. A new ballistics analysis confirming the gun's trajectory matched Willow's height and build more precisely than previously thought, as well as a recovered security footage snippet from a nearby building that showed a figure matching Willow's description near the scene at the same time. Crucially, this footage was overlooked during the initial investigation due to a technical flaw that was only recently resolved. The judge examined the materials carefully, brow furrowed. "This is post-verdict," he explained. Diane leaned forward, saying, "The case is closed." "Your Honor, this isn't about retrying the defendant. Double jeopardy prevents that, but it is about justice being served in the broader sense. The verdict was rendered on incomplete information. The court has the authority to acknowledge this new reality to issue a statement clarifying the record and potentially refer the matter for further investigation into perjury, obstruction, or related charges against other parties." The judge took a breath and considered the consequences. Port Charles had seen its fair share of miscarriages, Sonny's frequent run-ins with the law, Jason Morgan's numerous escapes, and Alexis' own disbarment and reinstatement. But something felt different. Willow had walked free, but the truth refused to remain hidden. After several minutes of silence, the judge sighed. "I'll review this overnight, but if this holds up, the record will be amended to note the insufficiency of the original proceedings. The verdict stands, but the court's confidence in it does not." The word spread rapidly. By the evening, Diane had leaked just enough to trusted contacts, not illegally, but enough to ensure the story made the local news and gossip mills. "Diane releases shocking evidence," the headlines read online. "Judge to reconsider verdict's weight after new proof emerges." It wasn't a complete reversal. No judge could undo double jeopardy, but it was a seismic shift. The court would publicly question the validity of the acquit, potentially leading to civil suits, professional repercussions for Alexis, and renewed scrutiny of Willow. SNY and Diane met later that night at Charlie's pub, where the dim lights cast long shadows across the bar. "You did good," he said sternly, sliding a glass toward her. Diane took a sip with steely eyes. "I did what the law allows when the law fails. Willow's free, but she's not untouchable. Michael deserves better than to be the scapegoat." Across town, Willow stood in her living room, staring at her phone as notifications flooded in. Drew had left hours ago without saying anything, and his silence was more damning than any accusation. Na hovered nearby, attempting to console, but Willow waved her off. "They can't touch me," she said with a hollow voice. "It's over." But it wasn't. In Port Charles, nothing ever truly ended. Diane's discovery had an impact on everyone's lives. Alexis sat alone in her office, head in hands, knowing that defending the guilty would permanently stain her career. Trina and Kai, who had first revealed the truth, faced criticism from those who believed Willow deserved mercy. Michael, caught in the crossfire, felt Sonny's protective shadow grow larger, while Drew planned his next move, determined that justice would be served. Diane returned to her desk. Despite the late hour and reviewed the documents once more. She had no illusions that the system had limitations. However, she had pushed those boundaries further than most would dare. The judge's reconsideration would not overturn the not guilty verdict, but it would ensure that the truth was heard throughout the community long after the gavel fell. Shockwaves continued to spread. Conversations in restaurants, whispers at the hospital, and tense family gatherings at the Courtroom mansion. Willow's freedom came at a cost, one that would be paid in reputations, relationships, and possibly even new trials for those who had lied to keep her safe. As the night progressed, Port Charles fell into an uneasy silence. Diane turned off her lamp, the evidence files neatly stacked next to her. She'd unleashed something unstoppable, a truth that wouldn't be silenced. And in a town based on secrets that was the most dangerous weapon of all, the story was far from over. It had only just begun a new chapter, one in which justice might finally catch up, albeit on a different path. The courtroom felt heavier than it had throughout the morning, as if the walls were bracing for impact. Every bench was full. Reporters sat hunched forward with pens hovering. The gallery was alive with whispered theories and barely restrained anticipation. Drew sat in the center of it all, jaw tight, eyes fixed straight ahead, avoiding Willow across the aisle. She hadn't looked at him since the proceedings resumed, her hands clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had turned pale. Diane Miller stood silently at the defense table as if on purpose. She was not shuffling papers or consulting with her client. She was not pacing. She was waiting. The judge repositioned his glasses and cleared his throat. "Miss Miller," he said evenly. "You indicated you had one final matter before we move on to closing remarks. I'll remind you that we're well past the deadline for new submissions." Diane smiled politely, but it never reached her eyes. "Your Honor," she said, her voice calm, but resonant. "What I am about to present isn't just relevant. It is decisive and respectfully. Justice would be impossible without it." A murmur echoed throughout the courtroom. Martin Gray shifted in his seat, his lips pressing together as he watched Diane intently. He recognized that look. He'd worn it once or twice before dropping a legal bomb that no one expected. The judge hesitated and then nodded. "Proceed." Diane turned and slowly walked toward the evidence table. "Over the course of this trial," she began, "the prosecution has painted my client as a deceptive manipulator, a man who knowingly falsified records, coerced witnesses, and orchestrated a cover-up for personal gain." She cast a glance at Drew before focusing her gaze on Willow. "What they have not shown," Diane continued, "is motive that can withstand scrutiny. Nor have they explained a series of inconsistencies that until now had gone unchallenged." She held a flash drive between her fingers. "This contained surveillance footage obtained yesterday afternoon from a private cloud backup. The footage was believed to have been deleted." "It wasn't." The judge leaned forward. "And why wasn't this submitted earlier?" "Because the existence of the backup was concealed," Diane explained calmly, "by someone with both access and incentive." A collective inhale filled the room. Martin's gaze shifted to the prosecution table where the assistant DA stiffened and lost color in his face. "With the court's permission," Diane explained, "I'd like to play a short clip." The judge nodded once. "You may." The lights went out. The screen behind the witness stand came to life. The image was initially grainy, depicting a hospital corridor late at night. The timestamp glowed in the corner of the screen. Several people in the gallery leaned forward at once, recognizing the location right away. General Hospital. The critical documents disappeared that night. A figure appeared on screen. Hood pulled down. The individual paused, looked around, and then slipped into a restricted record room. Gas echoed softly. Diane let the footage play for longer than necessary, allowing the tension to build before speaking again. "The prosecution claims that Drew was the only person with access at this time. That assertion is demonstrably false." The hooded figure turned slightly, allowing the camera to capture a profile. Willow's breathing was audible. Diane froze the frame. "Enhance," she stated quietly. The image became sharper. Blonde hair is visible beneath the hood. A familiar posture, a familiar walk. "No," Willow whispered, barely audible, but microphones picked it up. Diane turned to face the courtroom. "The person entering the records room is Willow Tait." The courtroom erupted. The judge slammed the gavel. "Order. Order." Drew surged halfway to his feet before stopping, his face filled with shock and betrayal. "Willow." He exhaled, disbelief cracking his voice. Willow stood abruptly and shook her head. "That's not right. This isn't what it looks like." Diane did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "The footage continues," she said calmly. The video resumed. Willow exited the records room minutes later, carrying a folder under her arm. She paused, looked down the hallway, and then disappeared down a stairwell. The screen became dark. Silence followed, thick and suffocating. The judge slowly removed his glasses. "Miss Miller," he said, carefully measured. Are you claiming that this footage was purposefully withheld? Yes, Your Honor, Diane responded. And I am ready to demonstrate how and why, she said, gesturing toward the prosecution table. The assistant DA was notified of this footage 3 weeks ago. The metadata confirms that it was accessed, reviewed, and flagged. Martin jumped to his feet. Objection. Sit down, Mr. Gray. The judge demanded. Diane continued. You'll have your turn. This video clearly contradicts the prosecution's theory of the case. More importantly, it raises reasonable doubt, if not outright innocence, about my client. The judge exhaled slowly. Miss Tate, he said, turning his gaze to Willow. Do you want to respond? Willow's gaze darted across the courtroom. Michael had risen from the gallery, his face distraught. Willow, he said softly. Tell them what's going on. Tears filled her eyes. I was trying to protect my family, she explained, her voice trembling. I didn't think it would get this far. Drew told me that if the records came out, everything would fall apart. I thought I was assisting. Drew looked at her, stunned. I never told you to do that, Hursley replied. I would never. Diane gently raised her hand, signaling for him to stop. The judge's expression hardened. Miss Tate, he said, do you admit to removing and concealing hospital records relevant to this case? Willow gulped hard. Yes. Another round of murmurs swept through the room. The judge returned her gaze to Diane. You are requesting what exactly? A directed verdict of acquittal, Diane stated without hesitation. Based on prosecutorial misconduct and newly revealed exculpatory evidence, the judge leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. The room held its breath. Minutes passed in what seemed like hours. Eventually, he spoke. In light of the evidence presented, he said slowly. This court finds that the integrity of the prosecution's case has been irreparably compromised. A sharp intake of breath was heard from the gallery. The verdict is vacated, the judge added. All charges against the defendant are dismissed, effective immediately. For a moment, no one moved. Then chaos erupted. Drew sank back into his chair, stunned relief washing over him. Michael took a shaky breath and gripped the bench in front of him. Reporters scrambled, shouting questions at each other. The judge slammed his gavel again. Order. Miss Tate, you have been remanded into custody pending further investigation. 2 officers approached Willow. She didn't resist being handcuffed, her face ashen and eyes fixed on Drew's. I'm sorry, she said quietly as they led her away. I really thought I was saving us. Drew said nothing. He could not. Diane gathered her files, her expression unreadable as she leaned down to Drew. You're free, she stated quietly. But freedom does not imply clean. Poor Charles will not forget this. He nodded, still trying to process the emotional devastation left behind. Outside the courtroom, cameras flashed as Drew emerged alongside Diane. Diane raised her hand in response to the barrage of questions. No statements today, she said sharply. Justice has spoken. Michael stood alone on the plaza, staring at the courthouse doors. Everything he thought he knew about loyalty, love, and Willow had been shattered. And somewhere deep inside General Hospital, secrets lingered, waiting for their turn in the spotlight. Because in Port Charles, the truth is never hidden for long. The courthouse steps gradually emptied, but the shock of what had just occurred lingered in the air like a storm that refused to clear. Drew stood off to the side, hands in his pockets, staring down at the pavement as if it could provide answers that the trial could not. Freedom felt strange, unearned, complicated, and heavy. He was not going out victorious. He was walking out completely exposed. Diane joined him a moment later, her heels clicking sharply on the stone. You did nothing wrong in there, she said, easily interpreting his silence. However, do not confuse a legal victory with emotional closure. Drew nodded slightly. I trusted her, he admitted at last. I built plans around that trust. Diane's expression softened slightly. In Port Charles, trust is currency, she explained. And it's stolen more often than it's earned. Across the plaza, Michael finally had to move. He approached Drew slowly and stopped a few feet away. The tension between them was thick, unresolved, but quieter now, less combustible, and more raw. "She's going to face consequences," Michael said quietly. "And I don't know how to reconcile who she was with what she did." Drew returned his gaze. "Neither do I." For a brief moment, they were not angry with each other. Just expressed disbelief. Shared loss. Willow was led down a narrow corridor inside the courthouse. Her footsteps echoing sharply and unforgivingly. The bravado she clung to earlier had vanished, replaced by the hollow realization that the story she told herself, protector, savior, necessary villain, had crumbled. The truth was simpler and far more cruel. She had crossed the line and it was too late to change the story. Back outside, reporters continued to speculate, reframing the case and looking for the next scandal. Diane observed them with practiced detachment. "This isn't over," she mumbled. "It never was. Someone always pays later." As Drew walked away from the courthouse, the sun dipped lower behind the buildings, casting long shadows across the steps where lives had recently changed. His name had been cleared, but his future was anything but. Relationships were fractured, loyalties were being questioned, and somewhere beneath the surface, new truths were beginning to emerge. In Port Charles, justice had changed its mind. Today. But the consequences were still piling up.